the HGS, we're pleased at such an overwhelming turnout for this special event, Legends in Wildcatting 2003. To begin, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to members, guests, students, educators that are here tonight, friends, family, and of course our Legends panelists who are seated here at the head table you'll meet shortly. The Legends here tonight each have unique career experience and expertise, and they are all very different. But what they have in common is that they have drilled successful wells, they have an extensive leadership history, and have made a big difference in their organizations. And now to open the program, I'd like to introduce Robert Pledger, HGS Vice President.
Thank you very much, Denise. I'd like to introduce Charles Sternbach. Charles has undergraduate and graduate degrees in geology. He started his career about 20 years ago at Shell Oil, and for the last 6 years has been with Jordan Oil and Gas. Charles is one of the great ideal generators in the Houston Geological Society. And through his work, tonight we will have the opportunity and the honor of hearing from 5 what I call legends. Charles has agreed to be the moderator of tonight's panel. Charles?
Thank you, Robert. This is an historic night for the Houston Geological Society. It's a great honor to be tonight's moderator. Never before have these legendary speakers been assembled in a single event, and how fortunate we are as members of the HGS to be able to access their hard-won collective experience. They have drilled thousands of wells, found billions of barrels of oil equivalent, and have had sustained business success. Tonight's first speaker is Michelle T. Halbooty. It is always a great privilege to introduce Mike for a very simple reason. He's succeeded, he's prolific, and he's endured. He is a past AAPG president, Sidney Powers medalist, and this year's recipient of the API's Gold Medal for Distinguished Achievement, one of few independents ever to be accorded such a high honor. Mike has written more than 300 scientific papers, largely focusing on stratigraphic traps, giant fields, and salt domes, things that really matter. He's drilled thousands of wells and is still drilling more. Michelle T. Halbooty, now 93, is recognized as one of the great wildcatters of all time. Mike, please come up and tell us what being a wildcatter means to you.
Thank you, Charles. A little philosophic view of wildcatting is in order. First, we must understand that the science that we practice is inexact and speculative. Geology has grown and advanced on the balanced scale of probability, rather than on the rigid, less flexible framework of mathematics. Interpretation in geology is made on the powers of deduction and observation. Without either one of those qualities, the efficiency of a practitioner drops considerably. Deduction and observation. Yet it is precisely this inexactness of our science that makes it such a great challenge to practice it. In June, I will be 94 years of age. I have been a member of the petroleum industry and our profession for 74 years. I applied my knowledge of geoscience, geology, and geophysics to searching for petroleum, oil, and gas. I've drilled thousands of wildcats. I've explored in 25 of the 33 producing states, and also in some of which yet have to produce. I have drilled wildcats in areas where others have failed to tread. While wildcatting for me was and still is my way of life, I just couldn't live without wildcatting. Even though I've gone broke twice, I found ways to come back. Let me unequivocally state that at my age I am having lots of fun still hunting and participating in the search for oil and gas. I am in my office every day, all day. I never let disappointment style my enthusiasm or optimism. I never gave up my desire. A dry hole only makes me look around the corner for the next wildcat to drill. My conviction controlled my decision to drill. The perfect closure was not a prerequisite, and if it were not there, I still checked all the available data, and if it supported my views, I usually took the risk. The final decision to drill or not drill was solely mine. At one time, I discovered 14 straight fields and followed that unusual streak of luck with 36 straight dry holes. Trying to keep my leases on the 14 discoveries from expiring and having 4 rigs running on those fields every day, and those 36 dry holes really and truly came near destroying me. There were hard times. Wildcatting can be very heartbreaking, but my credo was and still is, don't quit. Don't give up. When I started to practice my science, our profession had little heritage. Subsurface geology was mostly our dividing factor. The correlating mediums that we had was micropaleontology and drilling logs. Geophysics was so young that it wasn't used too much. We had to depend on whatever information was available. And we got it from micropaleontology and from drillers' logs. And yet, those of us who were independents struggled to put enough data together to identify a prospect. The major companies, with all of their knowledge and increasing research, did not give whatever few independents we had the information that they had. We had to seek it on our own. And I'll tell you, it was difficult. My best memories of wildcatting is the excitement of being on the derrick floor when a core is pulled and you can see and feel it full of oil. Believe me, no feeling of compelling force is greater today. Corn is not practiced much more because of the fact of the electric log. And the wildcatter is deprived of the great exhilaration of pulling an oil core out of the core bell. I have the pleasure of remembering the many times I was fortunate to see, feel, and actually crunch the oil sand from the core. What a pleasure. I have written and spoken of the necessities for an oil finder, such as optimism, ingenuity, creativity, originality, inquisitiveness, and above all, faith in his own conviction. He must be willing to reinforce in every way the strength of his conviction and to rely on his geologic reasoning, however unusual, different, or far out it may be. Many good potential oil finders have been ridiculed and squashed by a boss or supervisor who intimidated rather than encouraged an unusual idea. Each of us might recall some supervisor or exploration manager who stifled brilliant ideas with the overbearing arrogance born of ignorance, because it is from these negative thinkers that we learn that all is not as it seems in this inexact science, and that often minds are forced to veer from the truth. There is no question that fear stifles boldness in the explorationist. If fear of not willing to express an unusual exploration idea or concept, for fear of losing a job because the boss says it isn't any good. As a result, creativity and boldness in the exploration effort are discouraged by the fear of failure, whereas nothing new is contributed to the exploration thinking. Instead, mediocrity going along with the boys, an implied assent by science, or unfortunately the credo of many that are engaged in petroleum exploration today. As hunters for petroleum, we should not ever be afraid to experiment with an unusual idea or concept. And once you believe that you are correct in your analysis, stick with it and go for it. It may be a failure, but at least you gave your conviction a chance. I remember that often quoted phrase, the greatest risk is not taking one. Unless explorationists think as creative and bold scientists without fear of honest mistakes, and by doing so create new ideas, procedures, and concepts. Many of us here may live to see petroleum geology suffer the indignities of less acceptance. I firmly believe an open-minded approach in determining the feasibility of a prospect is a prerequisite to finding oil and gas, or better stated, to maintain a loose thinking attitude. This would eliminate tunnel vision and afford the explanationist a broader view. The phrase loose thinking is probably more descriptive than open-mindedness. It is obvious that very little wildcatting has taken place not only in the United States but in the world. And I am really disturbed about that. The mergers that have occurred have not met the expectations of the industry. Those merged companies are just not drilling, not only in the United States but worldwide. The world's reserves could be dwindling because of this inactivity. What is disturbing is that for every 4 barrels of oil that the world consumed in the last decade, the industry found only 1 barrel. Think about that. Just think about it. Let me tell you something. If we peak before the industry thinks it should peak, before you think it should peak, we will have chaos. We used to have scores of majors and hundreds of independents drilling wells, wildcats. Today there are only 6 major companies in the world, and in the United States we have a scarcity of independent wildcatting. In my opinion, bigger is not better. and that smaller and more are more efficient and productive. As far as the U.S. is concerned, I believe that we can find as much oil as has been produced. But we cannot find it unless we drill for it. As I am in the twilight years of my life, I am disappointed that those who formulate the exploration programs have not set up intensive exploratory efforts toward the purposeful search for the subtle, the obscure traps, stratigraphic, unconformity-oriented, and geomorphic. It is unbelievable that the motivation still exists to primarily continue looking for structurally related prospects that can be imaged with present-day geophysics. Many are found, yes, and drilled on anomalies no larger than a football. Some of the world's most significant subtle trap discoveries were made by accident. The 7 billion barrel stratigraphic East Texas field is a prime example. These accidental subtle trap discoveries were found by wells drilled on what was thought to be structure. Otherwise, the well would not have been drilled, and a large discovery would not have been found. We all know that the subtle trap exists in every basin. They're there. Yet no purposeful search has ever been made toward them. I have long been concerned about the lack of the purposeful search for these traps. And for years I have spoken and written about the fact that we are not looking for them. But that concern is nothing new. Geologists have long been exhorted to look for these subtle, particular stratigraphic traps. In 1936, for example, A.I. Leveson, one of our profession's most eminent scientists, delivered a stirring address titled Stratigraphic versus Structural Accumulation. He reflected on the then current approaches, which were limited practically to local deformational phenomena, such as anticlines, domes, faults, and similar features, and stated that geologists were solely neglecting the oil which occurs in stratigraphic traps. Those words are his quotes. I'll quote again. Geologists were sadly neglecting the oil which occurs in stratigraphic traps. End of quotation. It is inconceivable that in 2003, 6 or 7 years later, the approaches of finding these kinds of traps are the same as those in 1936. This should give us all something to think about. The entire spectrum of subtle traps are subordinated to the deformational phenomena, and unequivocally, this is a mistake in our professional thinking. Maybe the younger geologists, those who look to the future, those who will follow us, maybe they will generate enough enthusiasm and courage to purposely hunt for these traps. And they will probably meet the challenges that we have slighted for the past 70 years. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been an honor for me to be with you tonight and to share in these proceedings. God bless you all.
Our next speaker is one of our industry's best answers to those who claim there are no more domestic giants to be found. His success for doing so and creating shareholder value is legendary. Rocky Mountain fields such as Highlight, Madden, Red Ring Creek, Colorado's Parachute Grand Valley, and Cave Gulch have his fingerprints all over them. collective ballpark reserve estimates probably exceed 15 TCF or more for what Bill and his groups have done. And in May, in a few short months, Bill will receive the APG's 2003 Outstanding Explorer of the Year Award at the opening ceremony of APG. First and foremost, though, Bill is a geologist. He's combined his technical expertise as a scientist with the mindset of an entrepreneur to emerge as perhaps our industry's most prolific giant finder. Bill, if you would, please share with us some of your thoughts of exploration and where your vision is taking you next.
Well, it's tough to follow Michael, I'll tell you. All I can do is say amen. Thank you, Charles. It is an honor to be asked to join several of the true legends in our industry here tonight. I'll start out by stating that these are exciting times in our industry. The current opportunity to tap the potential of conventional and unconventional gas resource base in this country is immense. Couple that potential with the nation's need for reliable, secure, and clean energy, and the prospects for our industry for the next 20 years, I believe, are indeed promising. Now, I've been asked tonight to talk about some of my experiences and lessons that I have learned. Apparently, legends and lessons go hand in hand, because I've certainly had my share of lessons through decades of work in the Rocky Mountain basins and elsewhere. And they've come with both success and failure. One lesson that I have learned is that timing is important. Never underestimate the importance of timing. From a timing standpoint, our talent and technology has never been better. Utilizing talent like we have in this room tonight should make us more efficient and successful than ever. Good timing has been the consistent theme to success I'm familiar with. From some of the key discoveries I have been associated with to key moves relative to finance, going to the equity markets, if you're a public company, technology, oil and gas leasing acquisitions, or events such as getting Barrett Resources positioned in the Piceance almost literally overnight after the oil shale bust, or selling a company or assets at the top of the market. Another question is, what successful strategies can be applied to future exploration, and what do young professionals, or any of us for that matter, need to know about the future of this business? One important item, I think ultimately that a large part of our job is to make unconventional conventional. Conventional thinking tells us that the majority of the giant domestic conventional fields have been discovered, but it took some unconventional approaches to find many of them. Let me interject or emphasize there is still a lot of oil and gas yet to be found in conventional traps. So do not discard exploring for domestic conventional traps. My point is this: it's all unconventional at one point or another. That's what innovation is. Looking at or doing something in a way that hasn't been done before. When successful, the unconventional becomes conventional. Let me give you a couple of examples. In the Piceance Basin in northwest Colorado, we encountered an unconventional basin-centered gas trap. Now, we were not the only ones to recognize the potential existing in a 1,700 to 2,400 foot sequence of multiple lenticular tight Mesa Verde sandstones. We knew that this reservoir contained over 100 BCF of gas in place per each square mile. And there were large numbers of square miles in the Piceance Basin. But with that potential came a problem: how to commercially get the gas out of those tight sandstone reservoirs. Well, I think the use of a nuclear bomb just might qualify as an unconventional approach. In the late 60s and early 70s, that was the idea and technology applied to fracking the Mesa Verde sandstones, Project Rulison, Project Rio Blanco. Unfortunately, while it was unconventional, and this was a true massive frack, it was unsuccessful as well. You might say it bombed out. Not only was it very expensive, it turned the reservoir into glass. The gas was radioactive, and there wasn't much market for radioactive gas. However, persistence and patience did pay off when on May 2nd, 1983, Exxon shut down its massive oil shale operations. Now, after watching and waiting for some 15 years, we were able to assemble some 45,000 net acres at an average cost of $7.50 an acre. We sold a 75% working interest for $75 an acre. Our timing paid off. A 5-well wildcat program led to 4 discoveries and the subsequent discovery and development of the giant Grand Valley and Parachute gas fields. Again, utilizing patience and perseverance over the next several years after we recognized the potential, we ultimately acquired a 100% working interest in over 130,000 net acres in the Grand Valley, Parachute, and Rulison fields. We developed 1.2 trillion cubic feet of proven gas reserves and proved up an additional 2 to 3 TCF of high-quality probable gas reserves. 17 years later, the field has 6 rigs running full-time and is producing 225 million cubic feet of gas per day. Bottom line, what started out as a non-conventional resource with extraction by unconventional means is today a conventional cookie-cutter type operation with over 500 successful wells drilled to date without a single dry hole. Another example of great timing is seen in our involvement in the Powder River Basin, non-conventional coal bed natural gas play. Again, an example of timing, tenacity, and innovation. Very early in the life of that play, Barrett Resources recognized the potential, and we became 50-50 partners with Western Gas to jointly acquire over 1 million acres in the very heart of the play. Barrett and Western became the largest coal bed methane producer in the Powder River Basin and the state of Wyoming. We developed over 4 trillion cubic feet of gas net to our partnership interest. We found over 25 trillion cubic feet of gas we believe ultimately will come out of that basin. The industry has drilled some 8,400 coal bed methane wells to date that are producing over 900 million cubic feet of gas per day. This is another case where unconventional has become conventional. Now, we touched on a few lessons here. Most of them involve using common sense. That's the importance of timing, being patient, persevering, or having tenacity. You also have to understand risk and economics, and you have to understand it's all about making money in this business. I want to conclude my talk by relating 8 additional lessons that I have learned from my experiences in the oil patch. Lesson number 1, if necessity is the mother of invention, then technology might be the father. Nothing has hastened the move from unconventional to conventional more quickly than technology. I tell you to understand it, develop it, and it will open up huge reserves for you. Lesson number 2, despite our reliance on the science of geology, geophysics, engineering, land, and technology as the foundation of our industry, it's still about creativity and motivation of talented people. Your team needs to foster innovation and not be overly critical or judgmental. Keep an open mind for new ideas, new ways to do things. I can tell you any success I have had is directly due to the talented people that I have been lucky enough to work with. Lesson number 3, be a VIP. Strive for vision, integrity, and performance as values for yourself and your company. These values will withstand any storm the marketplace can deliver. Look at Wall Street today, and you'll see that the general public isn't seeing many VIPs, and we need to change that image. And speaking of integrity, I've found that your reputation in the industry is more important than your reserves on the books, and more delicate. With our company, Bill Barrett Corp., we were able to raise over $282 million in a tough economy early last year, solely on the basis of the reliability and the integrity of the people who joined our new company. Item number 4, innovation is exacting precise work. Technology allows the geologist to process a lot of information. And as a scientist, it's up to you to know how to interpret that information. Know the complete geologic history of the basin you are working, why are certain fields producing, why were dry holes drilled here. Details are the difference. A lot of conventional thinkers overlook details that might lead to an unconventional discovery. Item number 5, I've been very fortunate. Some would say even lucky. But you know the old saying, the harder you work, the luckier you get. I've worked with some great mentors, geologists, engineers, landmen, financial gurus, and have been part of finding and developing some sizable fields. Geology has been the one consistent thread through those experiences and successes. Let me give you some examples. The following Rocky Mountain fields were found with 100% geology, and in some cases in spite of geophysics. The Highlight Field, the 200 million barrel oil equivalent Highlight Field in the Powder River Basin. The 4 TCF Madden gas field in the Wind River Basin of Wyoming, a 200 BCF extension of the giant Wattenberg gas field in the DJ Basin, the 3 to 4 TCF Parachute Grand Valley Rulison fields in the Piceance Basin, the 4 TCF Powder River Basin coal bed methane play, which ultimately will produce, I believe, 25 TCF, the 500 BCF Cave Gulch field in the Wind River Basin. When I was a young geologist right out of school, I went to work for El Paso. They immediately discovered the 100 BCF Desert Springs field and followed that up with the discovery of the giant Patrick Draw field on the east flank of the Rock Springs uplift in the Green River Basin. I got to work in the giant San Juan Basin-centered gas field in New Mexico and Colorado. Again, all of these Rocky Mountain fields were found and developed with geology. So what does that tell you? Utilize the geology. It will help you find a lot of oil and gas, and it just might decrease the number of dry holes you'll drill. Lesson number 6. Now, this is a little different than Michael here. Hitting singles are for guys named Pee-wee. Guys named Babe swing for the fences. You can call me Babe. I go for the fences. If you don't take a swing at the big reserves, you're never going to hit it big. Now, I think it was Shakespeare who said, "It is better to have drilled and lost than to have never drilled at all," or something like that. That might have been Yogi Berra, though. I don't know. Dry holes are a part of our business. In true exploration, you're going to drill dry holes. I'm credited with drilling the deepest dry hole in the Rockies, the 25,000-foot number 1 Pacific Creek well. It was a great-looking prospect. It looked like a gut cinch. Yeah, that's another thing you learn in this business, to be careful of those prospects that look like gut cinches or look too good to be true, because a lot of them are. But remember, you must be willing to take risk, and you also need to understand risk. Item number 7. Challenge onerous, unnecessary regulatory and environmental regulations. Become involved in the political process. Fight for what is fair and right. Protect the environment, sure, but fight onerous, unreasonable regulations. Item number 8, final item. Listen to your gut. Again, in our field, science, technology, and numbers are kings. But trust your instincts, which are formed from your past experiences. The prime example here was our work in the Piceance, where conventional wisdom and evidence was there that there were no reasons to consider it prospective. Yet my gut feeling led me to the Piceance, where I felt, I didn't know, but felt that geology, combined with emerging massive fracture technology, could lead us someplace new. Well, folks, that instinct helped make Barrett Resources. It helped us build a $2.8 billion company, taking our share price from 38 cents a share when the company was formed to $73.32 a share in August of '01 when the company was sold. Also, our timing turned out to be very good in that case. In closing, I would say be optimistic. You have to have fun, and you need to enjoy what you do. Life well lived, a career well worked, is about making mistakes and learning from those mistakes and achieving success and learning how to repeat success. May you all enjoy the thrill of discovery in this new year. Thanks for the opportunity to share some of my reflections and for the honor bestowed upon me by being here tonight. I'll turn the podium back to Charles.
Our next speaker, Tom Barrow, is a former president of Humble, now Exxon, and former vice chairman of Sohio. And Tom was a pretty lucky guy because he grew up in a family where geology discussions were common at the dinner table. His geologist father was L.T. Barrow, chairman of the board of Humble, and his mother was a geologist too. As a graduate student at Stanford, this is a part I really like, Tom studied under A.I. Leverson, who many would consider a figure of Mount Rushmore proportions in our profession for his groundbreaking work on stratigraphic traps. Tom studied with Lev, and his work served him well through his long and successful career. And it helped him see the large stratigraphic component of Prudhoe Bay. So Tom, please come up and tell us how, and I find this fascinating, as a young man, you found a 100 million barrel field while still a graduate student. And if you have any advice for young professionals, I'm sure they'll be interested to hear it. So come on up, Tom.
He just stole all the highlights of my talk. But thank you, Charles. I'm very proud to be here with you. And I wanted to make a comment that I'm very pleased to see Robbie Grease here because we're both Longhorns. The other thing, as Charles said, my mother and father were Longhorns. They graduated 80 years ago. My father got his master's degree in 1923, and my mother her bachelor's degree in 23. And one of the first women to ever get a degree in geology from Texas or any other school. And actually, there were 5 women, the first time there'd ever been more than one in the history of the university. People said, why in the world was your mother a geologist? Well, there are 2 reasons. First, her father had been a gold prospector in California, so she grew up knowing something about rocks. But she went to the university with the decision that she was going to be a botany major. But she took a course in geology, and her lab instructor was my father. She changed her major. They were married soon after they both graduated in the fall of 23, and Dad was continuing to work as an instructor at Texas. But that summer, Wallace Pratt hired him in order to expand what was then Humble's exploration effort by opening an office in San Antonio. And I had the opportunity through my lifetime to know Wallace Pratt pretty well. He was a wonderful person. One of the things that Mr. Pratt had done, he had taken a little bitty company which had been found, I think, in 1919, and he went to work for them about a year after its formation. They had a little production down in southeast Texas, and some up in around north central Texas. He had a young geologist that was convinced the U.S. Geological Survey maps in East Texas were not accurate. There had been a shallow Natchitoches field found, and this young fellow, Dwight Edson, said, but that's not a structural, that's not an anticline like the USGS has it on its maps. It's a fault closure. So Mr. Pratt went and bought a bunch of leases out to the west and drilled a well and found the Woodbine production at Mahia. They then moved up found another fault line and drilled Powell. And by 1923, they had become suddenly the second largest oil producing company in the United States, second only to the old Standard of California with all the old California fields. Well, Mr. Pratt had the idea that, well, these faults continue, and maybe it'd be a good idea to map some of them in other places, and maybe we'd find some other kinds of fault accumulations. And so Dad's job was to look along what later became the Luling fault trend close to San Antonio. Well, Mother didn't like being left at home, so she would go out with my father and she would run samples while he hiked up and down creeks looking for faults. People ask me, how long have you been in this business? I went on my first ring floor 6 months before I was born. By the time I was 8, I could run samples and pick 4 Ams in the Gulf Coast. I didn't do it very well, but in 1932, a lot of people didn't do it too well. But things went on with the exploration in East Texas, and in 1927, the Boggy Creek field was found in Anderson County, and my father was moved temporarily, he said. Mr. Pratt decided that they would move 3 people into East Texas. Dad was given Rusk County to map. Alvin Wentland was given Gregg County to map, and Mose Knievel was given Upshur County to map. And the reason they did that is that they recognized that the producing zone at Boggy Creek was Woodbine, and they had enough control on the Sabine Uplift to know that there wasn't any Woodbine on the Sabine Uplift. In 1929, my father was moved to Houston and made the chief geologist. And also in that same year, the Van field was found in Woodbine County, another Woodbine discovery. And Dad very quietly decided that this was a good idea, and so they started acquiring acreage. They bought about 1,500 acres around the town of New London. They bought about 8,000 acres southwest of Longview. And then they traded half interest in that acreage to a block Gulf had up in Gregg and Upshur counties. And they had a Wildcat well planned to be drilled. But Dad Joyner got there first. And when the shows came out of the Joyner well, the Humble Company started a major leasing campaign along with Gulf. And as a result, when you look at the production history of East Texas, surprise, Humble had about 1/6 of the entire East Texas field because they already had a lease position when the field was found. And Dad said that was a lesson. He says, it's better to be second and have a lot than not be there at all. Pratt had another thing that he tried to teach everybody, and I think I learned it, that oil was a common occurrence in sedimentary rocks. So if you've got a sedimentary basin, it's not a bad idea to go look. Sounds simple, but in the 20s and the 30s, you got all kinds of predictions out of the USGS that we were running out of oil. And we're still running out of oil. We've produced a hell of a lot. But after World War II, I finally had gotten back from the Navy and got a master's degree at Texas and wanted to start working and got an offer to go out in Mr. Barrett's country in the Rockies. And my father said, no, you're not going to do that. He said, you still got 2 years of the GI Bill, and I don't even have to pay to get you through Stanford. And you're going to go out to Stanford and get a PhD because A.I. Leverson was teaching out there, and Dad had a great deal of respect for Dr. Leverson. So guess what? I went to Stanford. And because I was told that I was going to have Leverson pick my PhD dissertation, I listened when he told me what I was going to do. He said, the East Texas Basin has never had an effective stratigraphic and structural history done, and I think you should do it. I said, how in the world do I get all the information? He says, you've got the political contacts. You go get the Humboldt to sponsor you. Well, my father was the chairman. So they hired me for the summer. And I spent 6 months in Tyler doing the first basin study that the old Humboldt Company had ever done. And people looked at what I was doing and thought I was absolutely insane. I correlated every Wildcat well, electric log, by myself that had been drilled in the East Texas Basin up through 1949. And I drew 7 regional cross sections, 3 north-south, 3 east-west, and 1 diagonally. I built some 11 different Isopachus maps, starting down in the Jurassic and going all the way up through the Wilcox. A couple of structural maps. Everybody had those. But then I did 4 paleogeologic maps and started putting the isopachs on top of them. And lo and behold, I found out that at the end of Cretaceous time, if you added all those isopach maps up, the East Texas oil field was not a closed feature. Now that was fascinating to me, because obviously that was the biggest oil field in the country, and everybody said, well, the oil all migrated in there after the Austin, and by the Cretaceous time, that was where the field was. It ain't so, folks. The big thin along the pinch out of the Woodbine is down in Angelina County, and there's a big thin area that goes over into Houston County. So at the end of the Cretaceous, the volume of sediments is about right. The East Texas oil field must have been down in Angelina and Houston counties. And then by the end of the Wilcox, you'd had enough thickening going into the Gulf Basin that the north closure on that isopach thin had been lost. Well, Leverson was fascinated because he'd always worried about the fact that the gas saturation pressure in East Texas was only 755 pounds, whereas it should have been 1,430 pounds had it been where it was. Obviously, the oil had accumulated in a situation that was much shallower than it was at that point in time, as it was today. So with that information and my theory about migration, he became convinced that this was a wonderful example of long-distance migration. And if you don't believe it, look at a map and see how far Angelina is from Kilgore. Well, what do you do about that? Now, it was an interesting fact, but I'd remembered seeing a very weak seismic lead that Humboldt had east of Boggy Creek that they had shot years ago and hadn't thought much of, and it just sat there. And to his credit, Alvin went and had a block on it, but every time he took it to Houston and tried to get it approval to drill it, well, That's too weak a structure to ever be worth drilling up there. Look at how many structures in East Texas people drill and don't find any oil or gas on them. Well, I explained to Mr. Davis that, this was right in the path of, if the oil was down to the south and it got tilted and moved north, it would go right through this area. And that weak structure might be full of oil that had migrated late. So he finally agreed to drill a well on it, and that was the discovery well of the Neches Field. 100 million barrels from a graduate student is not bad for the. I think I earned my pay. And my lesson is, for those of you who have gray hair like I do, listen to the new geologists. They've got good ideas, and you ought to listen. Some of them will work. And you aren't paying them much anyway, so. Well, based on that, maybe Morgan Davis hired me and sent me out to California because they had an idea that there was another potential big stratigraphic trap in the Sacramento Valley, and I spent 6 months doing surface work on the west side of the valley, and it was hot as hell. 125 degrees when you could find shade. And we found out that there was a great trap, only was it all dipped, the pinch out was all down dip instead of up dip, and that was a great technical success, economic bust. I went to Ventura and worked there for a while, and having a creative mind, I keep telling myself, I had seen a bunch of photographs and out there from the low tide and saw there were a lot of tertiary outcrops that you could see and that rocks were exposed, and if you could just figure out how to do it, you could do a geological map. Well, one of my friends from Stanford was working down at the Navy Electronics Lab, and I found out that they had a whole bunch of guys that were qualified to do aqualung diving and who happened to be geologists. So we hired them for weekends, and they came up on Friday night, and we went out on Saturdays and Sundays, and we mapped the coast from Ventura all the way to Point Conception out to almost 200 feet. And what we did is we had them swimming what normal geologists in those days would have called a pace and compass traverse. We gave them sample bags. They would cut pieces of rock off the bottom, put them in the sample bag. We had little balloons that they could blow up with their air supply, and they would let them go with it and mark down, and I would be up in the boat, and I'd pick them up with a hook, and we would keep track, and I'd shoot in that location, and so we ended up with these lines going up and down perpendicular to the coastline. And it worked. We found structures that you couldn't see with seismograph. The dips were too steep. You were too shallow water. And we found the South Summerland oil field there. And then later we did the work that led to the finding of Hondo. And as far as I'm concerned, there are probably 3 or 4 more out there if the federal government would ever let anybody go explore. But that's a whole nother talk. We hadn't been out there terribly long, 51 to 58, and then they decided I should move to something else, so I was sent to New Orleans with 3 children and worked in New Orleans for a few years. Morgan Davis told me, now, if I catch you looking out beyond 200 feet of water, Tom, you're fired. I don't care who your father is. Well, think of what 200 feet of water restriction is in today's world. But we did find a few oil fields. We looked carefully, and we found 2 or 3 good fields. And I guess I must have gotten a reputation knowing something about the offshore. In 1964, I was pulled out of New Orleans and sent to New York. to be the executive vice president of a brand new company that they had formed called Esso Exploration. And Esso Exploration was given the chore of looking all over the world, except where Jersey had affiliates already. Well, in South America, that was Colombia and Venezuela. We couldn't look in Canada or the U.S. We couldn't look in France. We had a partnership with Shell in the Netherlands and in Germany. Standvac with Mobil was operating out in Indonesia. And the rest of the world was ours. It's a pretty big world. The company had done a lot of geophysical work in the North Sea. They had us set up in a lab here in town in which you had to have a special pass, security pass, that people called the Playboy Club. And nobody was supposed to know what was going on in there, but this is where our geophysical interpretation was all done. I got to see it finally when I got to New York, and it was exciting. And the British government and the Norwegian government started to say they were going to open up the country. And so we had a meeting with the Shell, who was our partner in the Netherlands, and we compared our geophysics. And a lot of the things were the same. And then there were a few prospects that, frankly, I liked a lot, and the Dutchman from Shell didn't think were worth a damn. And we argued and argued, and finally I thought, I'll have a way to get it. I said, would you agree that that you don't want this and we do, would you let us take it by ourselves? He says, are you kidding? I said, I wouldn't have said it if I was kidding. He says, hell no, we'll join you. And one of the first big discoveries was one of those blocks. So when you get into a partnership with people, don't let them talk you out of staying with them. Even if it's a bad idea, it's better to stay with them and be happy. And the Shell and Esso folks got to be pretty good friends, even though we disagreed a lot. But we also had a lot of other exciting things to do. We'd gotten a concession off of Australia thanks to a former Esso geologist who had done some work for BHP. And BHP had gotten a concession off the Bass Straits. Well, we didn't have anybody that knew anything about the geology, but I put together a seismic program and we did the work. And somebody said, well, where do we drill? And I looked at the map, and one of the people said, well, let's drill here. And I said, no, that's 250 feet of water. Let's go in and drill the well in 150 feet of water instead first, because that'll be cheaper. And we made the first discovery in the Gippsland Basin, the first commercial oil field for the continent of Australia. A lot of luck, but still it makes you feel good when you're first person out there. Then we were looking around the world, where else do we go? And I noted something, that there was lots of good tertiary rocks exposed on the north shore of Borneo that had land vertebrates in them. And there was a well that had been drilled in Bangkok and had gotten basement in what I remember 700-800 feet, a water well. So you had a shallow basement point, and you had this big Gulf of Thailand stretching there. And then you had all of the big rivers coming out of the Himalaya mountains. And I said, well, those land mammals in that deltaic sequence had to be connected in some way to those big rivers. So there must have been a big delta out there at some point in geologic time. We did have one piece of geophysical evidence. We'd put a magnetometer on a tanker and towed it from Singapore to Hong Kong. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was our geophysics. But we could see that there was probably a basin. So what do? Well, Mike Wright, who was later the head of the Humble Company and was then a director of Jersey, said, well, why don't we go out and talk to the governments? So he and I went out, and I got introduced, and I started negotiating with the head of the Malaysian government, Tunku Abdul Rahman, and also, after much effort, got into a meeting with the Premier of Thailand, Thanom Kittikachorn. And here I was, I had not quite turned 40 years old. This year was my first international year, and I get invited into this meeting. I have a Thai interpreter with me, but otherwise by myself, and I'm ushered into this magnificent room, much bigger than this, and with all this lovely Louis XV gold furniture, and all these officials from the Thai government, and a television camera. Have you ever tried to negotiate with a head of state with his military and naval heads sitting next to him in front of television? The Prime Minister spoke English, but he wouldn't admit it. And the reason I know that is that we'd get into negotiations, and he would say something, and usually it was the general that did the translation. And every once in a while he would pull the general's coat sleeve and shake his head and turn to the admiral and let the admiral translate. We never did get a concession from Thailand. The Unocal had some onshore acreage, and they beat us to all the acreage. But still, I think the Gulf of Thailand, I had to explain what international law meant in terms of what they owned. I had to explain what geophysics was and why you used dynamite. They were terribly nervous to have dynamite in boats because the Cambodians might seize the boats. But we got something accomplished, and clearly it was a very exciting year. The next year I came back to Houston and probably had one of the most exciting experiences of my career. Humboldt, through the efforts of a geologist friend of mine, Jack Jackson, had made a deal with Richfield to do seismic work on the North Slope. Richfield was principally interested in the foothills, which frankly I didn't think was worth a damn, based on regional geology, and the fact that there was a very interesting oil seep up on the shores of the Arctic Ocean inside the wildlife refuge. So, being simple-minded, go where the oil show is. We finally persuaded them to do the geophysics to get up to the coast. And lo and behold, we found this big, beautiful structure. And on the west side of it, this big unconformity and truncation trap. And I said, this looks like the East Texas oil field. Richfield had never seen the East Texas oil field. They wanted to drill the structure. We had to go to a lease sale, and Richfield's deal was we could only spend as much money as they wanted. And we tried to say, we'll lend you the money. We got the well drilled, and lo and behold, we had found Prudhoe Bay. Thank you.
For many, a legend is a notable person whose deeds or exploits are much talked about in his or her own time. That fits our next speaker, Marvin Davis, particularly well. This is amazing. He has drilled or participated in 10,000 wells. Think about that. Many of these were in Oklahoma, Wyoming, Gulf of Mexico, Texas, Louisiana. He is someone who is always at the forefront in many types of businesses and has had a virtually unparalleled longevity and diversity of success. Marvin, your sense of timing has been right on. So please come share with us your thoughts on exploration and what your sense of timing tells you about investing in the oil and gas business today.
I started out in this business, and I got very friendly with Bunker Hunt. And the biggest oil man in the business in those days was H.L. Hunt. And he said, "How would you like to go up and meet my dad?" God, meet your dad, my God. I was tongue-tied. Took me up to him and he said, "Son, you're starting out in this business." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Teach you one thing. Always remember this. He said, the guy that drills the most has got a chance of coming up with the most." Well, I took that as my creed. This is what I'm going to do. Next thing I did, I took a 80 well deal from Amoco on the east side of the Denver-Julesburg Basin. Cheap wells, they were $7,000 a well, they were shallow. And I drilled 80 straight dry holes. I was talking to myself. I figured there's no oil left in the United States. So every Sunday I took the kids. We used to drive to the supermarket, load the supermarket up with goodies for the week, and then we stopped off in the gas station to get the car filled. I took the nozzle, put it in the car. Didn't work. He says, pull over there. He said, try the other one. My wife looks at me in her nice little way. "You can't even find oil in a gas station." I hit her. Anyway, this has been a fun business all these years. I've had a good time. The ability to laugh at yourself, the ability to meet great people. It's a handshake business. I've been in a lot of businesses, but there's no business like this. The handshake is the law, and the honesty in the people is wonderful now. I get 12, 15 calls, people congratulating me. Gee, isn't that wonderful? When I was in the movie business, make a great picture. Everybody hated me. So there is a difference between the two. Now the business has changed. It's tough to get much volume, the type of volume we're used to. You got 3D. Each geologist has a geophysicist attached to him. Now I'm not talking to one, I'm talking to two. Then a third guy gets in and gets his opinion. So you're waiting for 3D, you're waiting for this, you're waiting for the seismic to come in, you're waiting for to reassess the seismic. And it's just tough to get volume out today. And volume used to make our business. We drilled a lot of wells, and in the words of the old man Hunt, we found a lot of oil because we exposed ourselves to a lot of things. Can't say we were smart, can't say we're dumb, but we drilled a lot of wells and crazy things happened to you. You just, by osmosis, let's say, it hit. Today, the end of the year, they told me I got 10 minutes to speak. I said, Mike can't say hello. Mike can't even say hello in 10 minutes. So so I want to tell you a few things that first of all, the year ending was the first time I've seen this in the history of the business. And this goes back for 60 years. There was no rush at the end. The rigs were down. There was no rush. No money to be spent. This and that. And everybody sat there. There was no action. And everybody said, "What's the answer to it?" Well, if I was brilliant, I'd give you an answer. But I'm not brilliant. I'm going to give you an answer. And the main thing is that the economy had a lot to do with it. The business is a cycle. sometimes it stays up higher, and times get good, and sometimes it gets lower, and times they bad, but it always goes around. So we saw a bad year at the end. So what? Need our product, the oil prices are high. It's still a great business. You got to walk with your head high and say, God dang, I'm glad I'm in it. Years ago, I had a young geologist come to see me. But our manager down in New Orleans came to see me. He said, I want you to take a look at this kid's prospect. I said, why? He said, he's pushing it on me and I don't like it. I said, well, that's a great start. I said, let me make up my own opinion if you want me to see it. So I went to the boy, and the boy was a nervous little Nelly. He said, Mr. Davis, he said, I want to show you my prospects. And he went through the whole thing. He said, hey, Mr. Davis, and the faults are here, and we got this there, and this thing we got. And, you know, I'm listening to him. I looked it over, and I said, no, I don't like it. You don't like it? I said, look, son, do something else. It's too complicated. It's too cut up by faults. I can't understand it. I don't think you can understand it. Well, I went down a couple of weeks later in New Orleans, and the manager said, this guy's going to drive me up a tree. He said, would you talk to him one more time? I said, so, go in there. And he takes me through it very nervously like, very shaky like. And I said, kid, I still don't like it. Well, I'm on a vacation. Peace with the world. I sunk a putt, 30-foot putt, won all the money at the end, laying out there, and the phone rings. This young, nervous kid on the phone, he said, Mr. Davis, he said, our leases are running out. He said, we've got to drill this. It means a lot. It's important. I said, all right, kid, but it's a can if it's not a dry, if it's a dry hole. Remember that. Well, we drilled a well. It was the biggest discovery we ever had. And in times we had it in the hock, and the business was bad, but that well carried our company. It made it. It wasn't a well, it became a big field. And I went back to see why I missed it so cold. Of course, second guessing is easy. And I saw what happened. He was so nervous that I got more worried about him, what I was going to say to him, tell him I don't like it, than it was worth. But we made it, and it really made our company. A couple of years later, my son was at Harvard Business School. He said, Dad, I've enrolled you, like this boy over here did tonight. He said, I've enrolled you. He said, you're going to speak to Harvard. He said, they all want to know about the oil business. It's all right. And I told him this story about the young boy and the well and what it did for us. And you couldn't get technical. They were the best and the brightest in the country, but you couldn't get technical with them. They didn't understand the technician. So I told the story, and I knew as sure as God made green apples, this was coming up. One little smart bastard in the back sits there. And he said, Mr. Davis, you're like your rich bastard. Whatever happened to that kid, they said, that found you all that oil and made your company? He left us and retired, went on his own. His name is J. Paul Getty. What's the next question? So, all I can tell you, it's been excuse me, I got a sore throat tonight. It's been a lot of fun, met a lot of great people, and they've been successful, and I'm now the rich bastard. So I thank you all for coming, and you didn't come for me, but you came for some great speakers and some guys that were more knowledgeable than I'll ever be in the business. And thanks a lot. Enjoyed it all. Hope to see you soon again.
Robbie Grease, our last and final speaker tonight, is president and owner of Priority Oil and Gas. And everybody who knows Robbie, and that's quite a lot of people in this room, because Robbie has been a very active AAPG president recently, and she's been a terrific spokesperson and traveled around the world many times. And is a very visible force for our profession. Robbie's a creative explorer and a new breed of wildcatter. She's also a pioneer, and I just want to take a moment because this is important, I think. She was the first in a long string of firsts, the first woman member of the Denver Petroleum Club, the first woman geology graduate of Colorado State University, and the first woman president of AAPG, and the list goes on, but you get the idea. She has paved the way using humor and wit, and for many young professionals, including half of tonight's scholarship winners, she is especially a role model. Robbie, please come here to the microphone and share with your friends some of your creative wildcatting ideas and what it has been like to be a woman pioneer in our industry.
Well, wildcatting is about taking risk. And wildcatters are people who have a tremendous tolerance for risk. And you've heard a lot about that tonight. And all of us who drill any wells that have an element of risk, and you've heard about the sure shots even having a tremendous element of risk, we know about that and we're willing to take that risk for the most part. But some of the best fun in geology is taking risks where you are challenging a dogma. And that's been the area where I think I've had the most fun, and I think I've lived up to the standards of my professor at the University of Texas at Austin, Charlie Bell. That's one of the things he always encouraged us to do, was challenge the dogma, was not to believe everything we read about or were told about, but to challenge the thoughts that are out there and challenge become the heretic on the scene. In my career, I was very fortunate, Mike, because some of my bosses have always been people who encouraged me to think outside the box and supported those views. And one of the first projects I got to work on at Texaco 30-some years ago when I was a young geologist was working on the foreland uplifts of the Rocky Mountains. The dogma of that day was that the Rocky Mountain foreland uplifts were vertical. And we were busy looking at the edge of the mountain fronts for concealed and hidden sediments that might have oil and gas potential beneath them. Well, the dogma of the day for vertical uplift, which was espoused and believed by many of the, well, I think almost all of the large oil companies in Denver at that time, was obviously not true because we had 7 wells, including one drilled by Bob Berg, who's here tonight, Dr. Berg, one drilled by him that went through Precambrian and established that these foreland uplifts did have high angle and low angle thrusts bounding them, but still the dogma was that we didn't have that. I had a lot of fun at Texaco developing foreland prospects. Unfortunately, Texaco had almost no budget to drill anything but development wells in the Rockies. And we didn't even drill our own best prospects, which were farmed out to Moncrief and found Teepee Flats, which was the precursor to the Cave Gulch area that Barrett Oil found, and drilling through a foreland thrust to do so. That was a great project. I went to work for a small independent afterwards, and we leased acreage, probably about 1 million acres on 7 different mountain fronts. And we're getting ready to drill them when the gas business and oil business fell apart in the 80s. So once again, I didn't get those ideas tested. Another wonderful challenge when I was with an independent after Texaco was developing a prospect that I thought was my best prospect ever, and I was quite sure that I would never have as good an idea again in my life. And I was developing an idea for an area where the Wyoming thrust belt and the Grovant foreland thrust came together, and I could see this sedimentary package going up dip under these thrusts, and I thought this was going to be the most magnificent field ever found in Wyoming. We leased the acreage, we shot portable seismic over it, we got ready to drill, and the people in this nearby village called Jackson Hole took offense to us drilling in their neighborhood. I took them out to the site where we were going to drill, and as we walked up the valley, I said, now Sinclair drilled here about 15 years ago. They drilled 3 wells. And the fellows in this group said, where are they? I can't see them. And I said, that's my point. And so they went up to our location, and you could not even see Jackson Hole from here. But I wasn't able to convince them, and we went into a lawsuit. 10 years later, long after that company had gone defunct and Texaco took over the acreage, I passed a courtroom door in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and I heard them debating whether we could drill this well. And as far as I know, it's still never been drilled. So my best prospect, I did find out later that I could find new prospects just as good as that. One of my favorite areas and I have to say the dogma for our little area between the Wyoming overthrust belt and the Grovant thrust, as the people fighting against this were making their case, they asked one of the leading geologists of Wyoming, father of Wyoming geology, what he thought about finding gas nearby Jackson Hole. And he said he thought there was about as much possibility of finding gas there in the volumes of a popcorn fart. So he didn't give it a lot of hope, and I've always been disappointed that we didn't prove him wrong. And I still think we have a great prospect there. The other place that I got really excited about was in the San Juan volcanic field of southern Colorado. I had been on a very disappointing dry hole in the San Luis Basin where we not only didn't find any hydrocarbons, we didn't even find the sediments we were looking for. We thought we'd find Cretaceous, and we drilled from very, very barren, mature tertiary volcaniclastic sediments into Precambrian, and it was extremely discouraging. But while I was there, I got to talking to some of the local farmers, and they kept telling me, well, we've seen oil shows over in the volcanic field. Well, I tried to salvage this dry hole by going over there and hunting down some of these so-called oil seeps. And I did not find any oil seeps where the farmers had led me, but they led me to other people who said, no, I've got one even further into the mountains. So I kept going, and in the middle of the San Juan volcanic field, about 6 miles from South Fork, and all the Texans love the term South Fork, but about 6 miles from South Fork, shimmying down on a rope down a canyon, we found a real live oil seep in the volcanic field. Well, this was very important because the latest USGS studies, using a new Aeromag field study for the entire volcanic field and gravity, had led the USGS to publish a paper saying that the San Juan volcanics rested directly upon Precambrian. Well, this was making it very difficult for me to find partners to drill in the area when they said it was resting on Precambrian, but I pulled out these oil shows and oil seeps, and we indeed found another one from a mining core at the far eastern edge of the basin. Had these analyzed, and it was all Cretaceous crude oil. Well, you can't get Cretaceous crude from Precambrian rocks, to my knowledge, unless you have source rock somewhere nearby. And so I was able to convince some very daring explorationists, John Mason in particular, recent president of Burnett Oil in Fort Worth, to help me explore in this area. We had a second dogma to overcome besides the geophysical interpretation by the USGS, and that was that the nearest producing basin was the San Juan Basin, where I think Tom spent some time, and Bill Barrett. And in the San Juan Basin, the heat flow gradient is unusually high. At 2,000 feet, you're already in the dry grass window. And everybody who's worked there blamed this heat flow on the big stack of volcanics nearby, the San Juan Volcanic Field, that causes all this heat flow. So the reaction when we first took our play on the road was, well, even if you had a sedimentary basin under here, it's going to be so overcooked after you drill through 4,000 to 6,000 feet of volcanic rocks that there won't be anything there. Well, we still looked at our oil seep and our oil samples and said they're not overcooked. So we still believe something is there in spite of these two dogmas we had to overcome. And we got some wells drilled, about 5 stratigraphic tests and 2 genuine oil and gas structural tests. And we indeed found the sedimentary basin. We found a beautiful section of source rocks, great reservoir rocks. We have yet to find the trap. I'm still looking for it. But we have a wonderful setting of over 1 million acres to really help this basin come to fruition, and we will do it in my lifetime. But that was a great feeling of success when the USGS guys came to me and said, look, we are so proud that you forced this issue and got this drilled, and we can go back and now change our maps and agree that there is a sedimentary basin there. And if you go look at their reserve estimates, they have the San Juan SAG under the San Juan Volcanic Field as one of our future oil and gas provinces. So there have been a lot of episodes, and I think the best parts of being a petroleum geologist are in not only taking the risks and coming up with new ideas and thinking out of the box, but challenging those dogmas that are stopping people from exploring areas. I'd like to speak, though, for a minute about one of the other parts of my career that is unique on this panel, and that's being in this business as a woman petroleum geologist. 30 years ago when I moved to Denver, there were no women role models, not in Denver. Houston, you had wonderful Doris Curtis here, who was also in New Orleans for a while. But in Denver, we didn't have any. We didn't have any women mentors. But none of us lacked for mentors, and none of us lacked for people who really worked for us and with us and taught us, because there was a huge number of men out there who became our great mentors in this career and really taught us a lot and welcomed us into the community of this profession. Some of the best ones that really encouraged me to get involved in my professional societies were Norm Foster, Lou Bortz, and Jack Parker. But one of the little-known mentors was a guy who hired me for reserve oil. And he was maybe an unlikely candidate to be a mentor for women. He had a reputation of just being a wonderful ladies' man, and he wore those white shoes with tassels. And Bill Leroy was really, though, a champion of all of his professionals. And when he hired us, he said, I won't have my women professionals not be a member of the Petroleum Club. And it wasn't we women geologists and geophysicists pounding on the door of the Petroleum Club that opened it. It was Bill Leroy with his white tassel shoes pounding on the door and saying, you will accept my professionals, which included me, the geologist, and the geophysicist Louise Bridges. We went into the Petroleum Club, what used to be the men's dining room, to have dinner or to have lunch, and we got seated, and a waiter came up to us, and he was kind of taken aback that we were sitting in this room, and he said, I'm sorry, ladies, we only serve men in this room. And we looked at him and we said, great, bring us 2. Humor goes a long way in this business. When I first went to work for Texaco, it was really as a token woman in our district. And in fact, my boss used to call me Token. Every time we had a district meeting, he'd knock on my door and say, Token, come down the hall. We've got a meeting. And I have to say, as a woman, you had to have a sense, I think, of whether someone's kidding was malicious or whether it was friendly. And my sense of Jim Erlob's humor was that it was friendly. And we've been good friends ever since, and he was responsible for a lot of promotions. But at that time, it was my first year, and he knocked on my door and said, "Token, come down the hall. We've got a meeting." And we went in, and all the district guys were there, and I was there, and he said, "We have to answer all these questions to prove that Texaco is hiring people who are disabled and of color and so on." And this was a particular questionnaire where we were supposed to answer if anybody had some kind of physical handicap. They had about 200 questions. Everything from being nearsighted to being schizophrenic was on there. So my boss, Jim, goes through the whole list, and he says, if anybody has one of these handicaps, let me know so we'll get credit for it in our district. So he goes through the list of 200, and he maybe gets like 5 strikes or something. And he gets to the end of the list, and he said, "Are there any handicaps that I haven't mentioned?" Well, in those days, my first year, we women in the industry were not allowed by any of the majors to go out on wells. And while we might have felt a little bit bad about this, the guys we were working with were feeling really angry about it because their well site duty was greatly increased when we couldn't do our share. You know, that would mean they were away from home a lot more. So when my boss asked this question, you know, are there any handicaps that I haven't mentioned? I said, "Well, Jim, I think I have a physical handicap that prevents me from fulfilling all my tasks as a geologist." And he said, "Well, what would that be, Token?" And I said, "Well, I don't have a penis." And I said, "Apparently, that's one of the things required to be a well site geologist." Well, he thought that was a pretty good story, so he passed it on to the headquarters. And well, within a year, we were out there doing our work on the rigs. And I want you to know, it is a handicap, especially in North Dakota in the winter. He was right. But on the other hand, I'm glad we broke that barrier, because one of the biggest thrills I've had in my career is well site work. When I was getting ready to come to this meeting, I was in Kansas drilling our 10th well of a 30-well program. We plugged one and have made 9 wells so far. And we logged night before last. And after we left, or I left, I was driving back towards Denver. And you had to wheel your way around these country roads. And I happened to get right up on a hill where I could look down in the dark, in the valley, and see our rig all lit up. And it just makes you just so excited and happy to look down there and see that rig, that's your rig, that you hired, and it's drilling for your gas. And it's one of the most exciting things that you can see. And one of the most thrilling sounds that I've ever heard is being wakened to the sound of the brake on the rig hitting your pay zone and just screaming because it's so porous. And the biggest disappointments that you've heard about here tonight are those times when you drill and it's dry and it was one of your best ideas and you are so depressed. And it's one of the worst experiences of your life. And I've been known to cry for 3 solid hours as I drove back to Denver. But one of the best moments is being out there on the rig when you hit your pay zone. And so I'm very happy that the rules have changed. And for over 30 years now, I've been able to be out there when we're drilling, and it's great fun. So thank you.
Well, we've certainly heard some good stories, and I think we still have the potential for some more good ones to come. We have a question. With new technology, where do you see the focus of exploration for hydrocarbons heading?
Well, I'll take a shot at that. Of course, I'm a little bit prejudiced being from the Rocky Mountain region, and talking earlier about conventional versus non-conventional. I truly do believe that there is an immense reserve of natural gas to be found in the U.S. and in the Rocky Mountain area in particular, because I know more about that. But we believe that on the low side, that in non-conventional reservoirs out there, which are non-conventional at this point in time, that there is somewhere around 180 TCF, and you can get numbers as high as 330 TCF. We truly believe that we can find what we call giant fields, over TCF type accumulations out there. And we just see an immense opportunity. And when you look at coal bed methane reserves like in the Powder River Basin, which I truly believe there's about 23 TCF remaining yet to be discovered and developed in that basin just from the coal bed methane. We'd like to get 2 or 3 TCF of that. But throughout the Rocky Mountain region, we've found more giant fields in the last 10 years in the Rocky Mountains than any other onshore domestic area. And we're one of the few areas that have grown our production on a yearly basis. Unfortunately, we're our own worst enemy in the Rockies, that we've found increased our deliverability so much we ran out of pipelines, and the basis out there is pathetic. But that will be taken care of in the next couple of years. But I'm a real big fan of the potential domestically, and we're putting our money where our beliefs are. So I think there's a great future for young geologists out there.
Tom, I would like to say, too, that for you young geologists, I think you need to look at everywhere we old farts have looked, and and look for what we've overlooked. Because even though we've found coal bed methane, there are so many parts of the world where they haven't even touched the coal bed methane reserves. We have made an art of developing tight gas sands, and there are places all over the world where it hasn't even been touched. And there are places all over North America that haven't been touched for tight gas sands. And so my belief is that the young geologist needs to go into existing basins with mature production and look at every zone that isn't producing and say, what is the dogma that kept this from being explored or kept this from producing? And would today's technology change that? And I think you'll open up a whole bunch of stuff right here. And I know there's stuff all over the world that hasn't been touched for that reason.
I don't want to talk about the domestic scene so much, but the worldwide scene. And I would say simple-minded approach. Look for the major rivers in the world and look where they flow, and then talk somebody into going looking on their deltas or in the offshore. You'll find very few major rivers that don't have big deltas, and most all of those deltas will produce.
The large reserves of the world exist in subtle traps. And until we search for them, we will not find them. I mean large reserves. Every basin has subtle traps. The stratigraphic, the unconformity-oriented, and geomorphic. That's where the big oil and gas fields of the future lie. And if we don't hunt for them, we're not going to produce it. Thank you.
We have, there's another question about with drilling activity being pretty flat, but commodity prices being high. Do any of the panelists have an opinion about the current situation?
Drill.
One of the questions for all of the panelists is you've had a lot of success, clearly by putting together terrific teams and getting the job done. What's the key to creating highly successful teams in today's environment?
Well, you're guessing me. Teams are individuals today, especially up here, not so much in the Rockies, though. As I say, you have to have a geophysicist attached to a geologist, and that's the team. The quality of guy that we have is terrific. There'll be no raises tomorrow, but the the quality we have is very, very high quality, very good, smart type of geologists. Geologists have been through a lot of storms, their ups and downs, but they know what they're doing, and they're quite thorough. They're very dedicated because they have an override.
But you know, there aren't very many companies giving their geologists overrides anymore. You don't hear about it much. And Marvin, you made it very popular in the Rockies. And I know I probably got mine from different companies because you set that precedent. And there aren't that many companies doing that today. And I think they ought to take a look at it because it's a sure good motivator.
All of our people have their own money in our company. And if the company is successful, I can tell you they're all very highly motivated.
Would you guys like to hear one story more? It just occurred to me. Many years ago, we were dealing with BP. This is before Brown. And it was controlled. This was controlled by law this, sir, that, this, another law, this. The guy didn't know the oil business, and we had a negotiation with him. Well, I decided to fly. I had to fly to London to meet with him, and I took Henry Kissinger with me. I said, Henry, I could use you in this meeting. It means a lot to me. He said, I will be very happy to come. Well, we sat down in the meeting, and there was everybody that focuses on Henry Kissinger, not the deal, which meant a lot to me. I'll figure the deal out, let them play their little games with Henry. And I start going around the table trying to figure out who's the oil man here. The little Scotsman in the corner there. I said, what have you got in your mind? And he was the only one. Well, David, I'll tell you how I feel about this. If I go to the corner in the beginning, we set the platform out this way, and it's going to. I said, yeah, that sounds good. And everybody on the other side, because that's what Henry says, you don't know what he's saying. I said, do you? He said, yeah. I said, how do you know? He said, that's my business. Well, we negotiated. I don't know what I negotiated in the end. But we did make a deal. So it depends a lot, when you're trading, is to take the point off a lot of the players that don't know anything about it. Go right to the meat of it. This little Scotsman was the meat of it. I thought you get a kick out of it, and I've got to run back to back home, but I thank you for letting me come here tonight. It's been a pleasure.
We've heard a lot of collective wisdom and experiences tonight from our speakers about past successes for which we are deeply thankful. Now, what really matters most is what we do with these lessons and some of the things that we've learned and talked about tonight tomorrow.